Hello everybody, my name is Alan and welcome to Crimicide, the show where we unravel the truth of the world's biggest mysteries. Now today we'll be starting something super special for the channel, a two-part series, one part coming up today, this video obviously, and the next one coming up next week. I'm calling it Deadly Russian Wilderness, and it's about two specific events in Russian history that have just remained unsolved ever since they happened. So before I spoil anything, let's get into our first case. In the vast and largely uninhabited wilderness of Russia, deaths are not an uncommon occurrence. Death by misadventure, hypothermia, and even animal attacks do happen. However, there are a couple incidents that really stand out. Horrific deaths with no explanation. In this two-part series, we'll be exploring the incidents at Khamar Daban Pass, and of course, the more infamous Dyatlov Pass. After an extensive amount of research and investigating, I feel I found answers for both incidents, or at least a step out of the darkness that shrouds these two horrific and mysterious occurrences. And with that, let's jump into the story of the Khamar Daban incident. On the day of August 2nd, 1993, 40-year-old master survivalist and hiker Lyudmila Korovina led her group of 6 students to Khamar Daban Mountain Pass for a routine hike as she had done countless times before. The names of these 6 unfortunate souls are Tatiana Filipenko, Timur Babanov, Victoria Zalesova, Valentina Utochenko, Denis Shvashkin, and 23-year-old Alexander Sacha Krysin, whom Lyudmila had known for most of his life, even being something of a surrogate son to her. Lyudmila and her group were one of 3 hiking on the mountain, one of which was led by Lyudmila's daughter Natalia. The plan was to meet up with Natalia's group on August 5th to finish the hike. The route Lyudmila and her students were taking was one she was very familiar with, having taken the route countless times. The group had been anticipating this trip for months, excited to finally be taking this scenic hike. After beginning their hike, the first 2 days went without incident, Lyudmila and her group enjoying this routine journey through nature. However, on August 4th, the group's luck had run out, and the spiral towards tragedy had begun, and they were hit with a savage rainstorm. The rain had washed away their energy, soaking their clothes and supplies, the waterlogged gear weighing them down. The group became quickly exhausted, and Lyudmila decided to hastily set up camp for the night, despite there being tree covering nearby. The next day, the group woke up with high spirits and humid weather, though they were able to build a fire and eat a hearty breakfast before gathering their supplies and heading out to finish the hike. Later that day, Natalia and her group were at the agreed-upon meeting spot for their groups, waiting patiently for her mother and her group. Unfortunately, her mother never showed up at the spot. Unbeknownst to Natalia, tragedy struck her mother's group in the most horrific possible way. On August 10th, 5 days after Lyudmila and Natalia's groups were supposed to meet, a group of kayakers noticed something unusual in the tree line during their routine trip on the river at the base of Khamar Daban Mountain. A girl, all alone, staring at them and covered in dried blood. Horrified, the kayakers headed ashore to help the girl. The girl was hysterical, trying to tell her story, but not being able to vocalize the horrors she witnessed. This girl is the sole survivor of Lyudmila's hiking group, Valentina Utochenko. The kayakers took Valentina to the nearest police station and filed a report. Valentina, horrified and shocked, just couldn't tell her story, and that's where the mystery ended until many years later, when she finally told her unexpected and horrifying story. Valentina recounted her story and gave the following details. The day after the rainstorm, after eating breakfast, the group set off down the path without incident, but just a few minutes later, Sasha, who was at the back of the group, let out a bone-chilling scream. The group turned around quickly to see what was wrong, only to be confronted with a horrific sight. Sasha was bleeding profusely from his eyes and ears, frothing at the mouth before collapsing to the ground and writhing with pain, before going limp and still. Lyudmila rushed over to him, distraught. She knelt down and held Sasha and ordered the group to continue down the trail. Lyudmila tried desperately to wake Sasha up before screaming out, showing the exact same symptoms Sasha had shown mere moments before, frothing at the mouth and bleeding from the eyes and nose, convulsing in pain before falling dead on top of Sasha. Tatiana rushed over to Lyudmila's aid, only to start exhibiting symptoms as well, gripping at her throat, struggling to breathe before crawling to a nearby rock and bashing her own head in. Watching the horrifying scene play in front of them, Victoria and Timur fled in terror, while Denis sought shelter behind a nearby rock. Valentina, having watched 3 of her closest friends die in a horrifying and inexplicable way, stood frozen in shock. Victoria and Timur didn't get far before displaying symptoms of the mysterious affliction as well, vomiting blood and clawing at their throats, tearing their clothes off before collapsing and dying. Shortly after this, Valentina and Denis ran to each other in fear, realizing they were the only ones left alive. Unfortunately, Denis soon fell victim to this illness too, falling to the ground and violently convulsing, dying soon after as well. Fearing for her life, Valentina gathered as many supplies as possible and fled to a tree covering, leaving her friends behind. She hastily set up camp and fell into a restless sleep, expecting herself to perish the same way her friends had. The next morning, upon waking up, she realized with a shock that she was still alive. Whatever happened to her friends, she survived. Valentina knew she had to retrieve her friends. Upon returning to her deceased friends, she came upon an unsettling sight. She found her friends laying there, gray and cold, naked with all of their eyes missing from their sockets. She gathered the supplies she needed and followed power lines through the mountain, trying to find civilization to help her friends. She wandered the mountain for 4 days before the group of kayakers found her and brought her to safety. Even after filing a police report, Russian authorities wouldn't conduct a search for the bodies until August 24th. After the bodies were discovered, an autopsy report of the corpses revealed the victims had bruised lungs, a protein deficiency due to malnutrition, and signs of hypothermia. Their deaths were ultimately ruled as an accident, though I think it's safe to say there's more to this than meets the eye. There are several theories that have been pitched, and I'll be going over them as well as the discoveries I made in my own investigations. Before we get into the theories, if you guys like my content and want to see more of it, including part 2 of this 2-part series, go ahead and comment, like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell for notifications on more of my videos. I really enjoy doing this, and the channel growth really helps out. If we could hit 1,000 subscribers before the end of the year, I would be extremely grateful. And with that, let's get into the theories. Now admittedly, the theories are relatively weak, but for posterity, I will read some off. One theory suggests the hikers saw something they shouldn't have, possibly something the Russian government tried to hide, and were subsequently killed, and the coroner covering it up. Another sinister theory suggests that a nerve agent killed the hikers, specifically a nerve agent known as Novichok gas, a chemical weapon developed by Soviet scientists and tested in the Khamar Daban region. However, nerve gas is soluble in water, and the heavy rains from the night before would have diluted and stripped away the gas of its lethal properties. Another relatively realistic theory is that their water was tainted by toxins brought on by the heavy rains from the night before. The last theory on my list is the group consumed poisonous mushrooms that killed them off, though the public autopsy reports I've read make no mention of mushrooms in the victims' stomachs, which would have been notable. All of these theories have one massive hole that I believe debunks them all, and that is the fact that Valentina survived. There is no evidence that Valentina did anything different than the rest of the group, and thus, the previously mentioned theories wouldn't have spared her. However, after my own investigation, I feel the most likely scenario is the most overlooked: disease. After reading the autopsy reports and documenting symptoms that the victims had shown, I reached out to a doctor friend of mine who is an expert in researching diseases. After reviewing my evidence, he came to the conclusion that the disease the hikers fell victim to was hemorrhagic fever, specifically Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever, or CCHF, which has been detected in Russia as recently as 2022. CCHF is transmittable via tick bites or contact with infected blood, which would explain the rapid transmission of the disease as the victims bled profusely. Symptoms of the disease are extremely similar to that which the hikers showed, and the disease works rapidly, the symptoms often starting merely 4 days after infection, so it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility that the hikers were bitten by ticks carrying the disease before their hikes, with Valentina simply being extremely lucky to have survived. Symptoms of CCHF include large areas of bruising, severe nosebleeds, uncontrolled bleeding, and more. Is this a perfect theory? No. But based on Valentina's account, damage to the bodies, and symptoms shown by the hikers, I feel it may be the closest anybody has come to the truth. That being said, I doubt anybody will ever truly know what happened at Khamar Daban Pass that horrific day, though I hope my theory has at least taken us a little bit closer to the truth. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of this 2-part series. Part 2 should be uploaded next weekend, or maybe the week after if I fall behind. But part 2 is definitely coming. Again, if you want to be notified when part 2 comes out, I recommend ringing that notification bell because that's the only way you're going to get notified. This is a project I've been looking forward to doing for a little bit. Ever since I heard of this, I knew I had to do it. So it's really exciting to finally do it and to reach out to an actual medical professional for their input. This was just a really interesting journey, and it's, something I've enjoyed doing. But with that, I'll see you guys next time.